Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Boxscore Geek Show. This is your weekly dose of everything Charles Barkley hates about basketball right here. Um, I am the NBA Geek. I'm Patrick Minton. I'm joined here by my co-host, Dre Alvarez, who is Nerd Numbers on Twitter. And this
Yep.
week we have a special guest. Layne Vashro is joining us. We're going to talk a little bit about some draft models and stuff. Layne, say hi to everybody.
Hey, how you doing?
Um, Layne, I first got to know your work on the Canis Hoopus um, uh, Sports Nation, I think that is. Is that a Sports
Yeah,
Nation
yeah,
blog?
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, which it's one of my favorite blogs, and it's one of the more, I would say, analytic friendly blogs out there, especially when it comes to sort of the mainstream fan blogs, which must be something of a curse for Minnesota Timberwolves fans, given that organization. So, do you come from a Timberwolves background, or is that just the site that happened to pick up your work first?
No, no, yeah. So it was a. I'm a Timberwolves fan. Really, I kind of.
I'm sorry
I,
for you. I feel your
yeah,
pain.
yeah. No,
You and I, we have a bond of pain.
yeah. I've almost. I don't even. I barely even call myself a fan nowadays. It's really just the Timberwolves are the team that I follow most consistently.
Uh-huh.
But that's where the history is, and that's how I got in. That's really Kane Supers is where I got a lot of my development for being interested in this stuff.
Yeah, so it was a couple of years ago. I was at the time I was working with Arturo at Boxscore Geeks, and I remembered that you could kind of take your spreadsheets and Arturo's draft spreadsheets and put them next together, and the alignment was very, very close. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, the agreement about who was good and who was bad was pretty damn close, which it always surprised me because the alignment between either of your spreadsheets and let us say the typical NBA organization didn't necessarily match up very
Mhm.
well, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later. But first of all, tell us your background is actually, in your real life, you're an anthropology PhD and you're
Yes,
in Utah right now. So
correct.
tell us how you got involved in being a basketball number cruncher.
Well, a lot of it was, when I was first getting started in grad school, there was a lot of new analytical techniques that I wanted to be trying out and things that I wanted to explore, and it made a nice little play box to test stuff out. Because especially relative to anthropology, the amount of data you have available is just amazing. So you can just go on, pull up public data sources, and play with them and try new things. So it was really a sort of a training tool for me, and then I got more and more interested and started taking it more seriously. But that's really what got me going as a something to play with.
So yeah, okay. So your stuff started. I mean, when I first started, was reading your stuff, you were literally posting an Excel screenshot, I think, in an article on Canasupis. Later, you started publishing some Google Docs, and now you've kind of gone a little mainstream, and you're on nyloncalculus.com. You've got
Mm-hmm.
yourself and the link will be in the show notes, and Brian's probably putting it up there right now as we speak. But basically, you've got a pretty neat looking tool where you can sort by the expected future performance of your favorite college stars, assuming that they're in the database and have declared for the draft. You never know when Usai Majuri is going to pull out some guy from Brasilia that you never heard before. But what I think is interesting about it is you tend to kind of lump players into a couple of buckets,
Mm-hmm.
which are, there's the guy who's going to become a bench player. There's the bust. Obviously, that's the guy who's not going to do much at all. There's the bench player. There's the starter. There's the stud, and then there's the star.
Yeah.
Um, so before we get like too deep into, well, actually no, let's just dive right into it. Let's talk about how we build an NCAA prospects model. What goes into this? How does this get built?
Well, it's so the sort of flagship, the EWP. It's a linear regression model where I'm throwing at it all the what we have that's available for useful data, which is mostly box score statistics from college, then basic size stuff, height, weight. Um, I've gotten I've gotten a little more cute recently, and I started integrating some team stuff that helps get at the context that may affect what the player's
So when
situation
you
is.
say team stuff, you mean like the strength of schedule for the college team he played for, or
Well,
stuff like this, or
definitely strength of schedule, and then age is a huge one, which I didn't mention. Can't leave age out. But then,
yeah,
but
age seems to be one of the biggest ones, right?
yeah, but yeah,
By the
yeah.
way, one question, and sorry to just keep heaping
No,
stuff
go
on you
for
to
it.
ask about your model, but I know one thing Arturo started mentioning when he was looking at drafts is one effect that happens is in college you get these genuine super teams. It's not like the NBA where you get three of the best players in the league and that's a super team. It's like you get every one of the top prospects. So have you done any kind of interaction effect between like, you've got Noah playing next to Horford playing next to, I forget if David Lee was around there at the same time, but you have like three top quality NBA players in NBA age playing together. Does that impact any of
Well,
your
Yeah,
it
if I
decisions?
remember
matters.
right,
Yeah,
if I remember right, Lee was a senior when Noah and Horford were freshmen, I think.
yeah.
Or actually, no, I'm sorry, Horford is a year younger than Noah too, so there's some craziness in there. But to get to, I think Dre's point is like
Don't leave
what
out Corey Brewer.
yeah. What we were talking about is that Arturo started noticing this thing of he had some guys that weren't rated very well, but they were like maybe the fourth best player on a really good team. And his speculation was that if you took that guy and you slapped him on some other team, if you took like the fourth best guy from Kentucky and you put him on Arizona State, all of a sudden he would look like a superstar. And there was some question about whether or not players like that kind of get lost in the shuffle. I tend to kind of go the other way around because a guy like Marcus Teague, for example, never gets drafted if he doesn't have the luck to play with Anthony Davis, right? So, but are you accounting for? Are you trying to account for like team interactions? Like how strong are the teammates?
Yeah, I do. And so like margin of victory, and so not only is strength of schedule important, but also margin of victory. If you play on a better team, um, you're better than your numbers on average. I
Okay.
think a lot of it is because of that diminishing return stuff. And I've been able to, I've tried to sort of parse that a little better because that's a big generalization. And by looking at stuff like um, if you play with if you play with teammates who get lots of rebounds, you're probably a little better than you look with just your rebounding because of the diminishing returns and rebounds. There's going to be some, so you get a little benefit there for if you're Willie Cauley Stein playing next to you look at Kentucky right now, they have
Right. And
five guys who are just dominant bigs, and there's only so much to go around in terms of all the big guy stuff that's going on down
And to our readers, a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge is probably going to sound really familiar to you because we talk a lot about team
there. Right.
adjustments and especially the diminishing returns of defensive rebounds are pretty big in the wins produced and points over par formula. Um, and there's a team defense adjustment. There's an adjustment for assists and how they interact with your field goal efficiency. And basically what that says is if the team is full of guys who have high assist rates, then people get a little less credit for how efficiently they shoot the ball. And if there's a team full of defensive rebounders, then basically every rebound you grab counts also as one that you've taken away from a teammate. There's all kinds of adjustments like that. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of kind of the same things, but you've just arrived at the conclusion from a different angle
Right.
in
And
your stuff.
and what another team factor that's interesting is it helps to look at the percentage of shots that are at the team level that are 2 point versus 3 point. Because if you play on a team that scores a high percentage of 2 point attempts, you're gonna look your numbers are going to be suppressed because the paint's packed. It's just harder to get good looks. Where if you play on a wide open team that has a high 3 point attempt ratio, you're going to have a slightly easier time, and that comes out
So
when you look at the.
yeah, so this is fascinating to me. So if you look at, for example, Iowa State's offense, Fred Hoiberg has an offense that looks very much like Daryl Morey's D League dream of everybody just shoots the hell out of the three ball and they try to get layups and they don't really care about anything else. I think the only twos they ever shoot are at the end of the shot clock when they have no other choice. Um, so a team like what I've always find curious is to me is a scenario where you get a guy who comes from an offense like that And then in the NBA, he has to go play for Randy Whitman or Flip Saunders. And suddenly he doesn't look so hot because he's shooting long twos and he's the plays that they are running for him are getting him post up opportunities. Another thing that he's not actually very good at. Is there any kind of accounting for the difference in the NCAA versus the NBA? Like, is there any sort of factor that says, well, this guy does things that are bound to suffer when he's in the NBA? Because you hear this all the time. You hear Scott, like, I remember 6, 7 years ago when OJ Mayo went so high in the draft, we were all saying, well, OJ Mayo didn't look very good in college. Why is he the number 3 pick? And everybody said, but oh yeah, but his game is built for the NBA. It's going to look so much better in the NBA. Which didn't turn out to happen. But I'm just curious if you have noticed any effects like that where you can say, well, this player's game is going to translate to the NBA, but this player's might not. And I suspect age and height are probably a big factor in there too, I'm sure.
But I have a few good ones for that. One would be OJ Mayo doesn't count. But there are guys in a slightly similar vein, like Derrick Rose, John Wall, Bledsoe, Patrick Beverley, guys who are the super athletic slashing of Westbrook's and kind of, especially if they're a bit stronger, point guard role.
How does the model quantify that?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, to be honest, it's because if the combine stuff was better, maybe you could get at it through physical. Because I have found that the physical measures do add something meaningful. But to get that specific, I think I have to sort of address that subjectively after the fact, because I mean,
all those model?
No, well, the Humble's trying to do that, but in a more controlled way by taking into account the actual mock draft rating. So it sort of gives the scouts their due and lets them have an influence, and then it includes all the other variables as well to sort of move around that and say, but they're always wrong about this, they're always wrong about this, and tweak around that. That's the goal of that one.
And then, of course, you always have surprises. I mean, and the one we talked about in the pregame show is Marcus Beasley, who looked like he was Michael Beasley, who looked like he was the second coming of Kevin Durant, and then turned out to be the second coming of Isaiah Ryder.
And the thing is, like, there's some surprises where you go back and it's like, oh, I didn't really think of this, or now I can really explain. When Michael Beasley came out again, he would be my top pick every day. I mean, every time. He was just amazing. And even just subjectively watching his game, he was just so dominant. It was really hard to imagine.
Yeah, on that note, the first thing I did when I looked at your model is I hopped to 2003 for the Nuggets. And you would have told, like, Detroit, if they were looking for a big, this Bosch fella is pretty good. Actually, you might have told them to go for Melo, because Melo, in theory, could have been a 4-2.
Wasn't Bosch a high schooler?
No, Bosch was playing college.
Texas.
Did he? Oh.
Yeah.
Georgia Tech, actually, I believe. Durant went to Texas.
But
I'll look that up for you guys.
But yeah, the first thing I did is I looked at Melo, and that's just one of those things where it's kind of like you look at the Nuggets, they had, the number 3 pick, Melo's on the board, you watch Bosch and Wade go do their things. I don't care what people say. Melo never turned into that NBA star they were hoping he'd be, made the money like one. But, your model said that, and that's the same thing where I think going back in time, Melo and Beasley, and heck, even Durant, even after that first season where it looked like he didn't know how to shoot, which is hilarious at this point, I think at all points you look at your models and you just go, yeah, if I try and overreact to those players, I'm overfitting probably. Sometimes players just don't turn into NBA.
And the way I like to talk about it is, my models kind of suck, and I know that. I mean, because you do it with the statistics, I have a number that says this is how much it sucks because this is how wrong it is. But at the same time, if I do out of sample retrodictions, I go back and I do it in as fair of a way as possible, and I compare it to actual draft order. It does better, maybe only a little bit better, but that's even the most, naive possible way of just drafting.
This is something that we talk about all the time. Is that, the draft is it's just hard to get it right in the draft, right? The sample sizes are small, and the correlation to future performance isn't perfect, isn't great, and tons of variables play a role. But the thing is there's a difference between getting it right 30% of the time and getting it right 40% of the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's actually a monumental increase in performance, and particularly when you're following the strategy that seems to be in vogue right now with all the rebuilding teams, where their strategy is, oh, let me just get 10 draft picks and see who works out. Well, okay, a 30% hit rate versus a 40% hit rate equals one more star. So that's actually a big deal. And you know, what NBA teams traditionally suck at, though, is just cutting loose on the 6 or 7 guys who don't work out before their rookie contracts expire. That's something that I'm going to be very interested to watch, like what happens in the next few years, and particularly in the next CBA with how teams work around that. But let's go back to the categories. We have bust, and this is a guy who just isn't ever going to play significant minutes in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
There's bench, which is I'm going to pick out your earlier Corey Brewer as a classic example of a bench player, right? Then you've got starter, who's, you know, basically your average NBA player, pretty much. I hope that's about an accurate.
Well, I think your average NBA player is probably a bench player, but the starter's the top 5 on the team. So
okay, yeah. So what's the difference between bench and starter then? Like,
so the way I operationalize it's a bit loose, but it's a bust is anybody who never in their career is worth more than 2.5 wins in a season. A starter is at least 5, stud is at least 7.5, and a star is 10 or more. So that's the way.
So stars are really like more than just all-star. They're more like all NBA type players.
Yeah, you're pretty special if you reach that.
Okay.
There's not really guys. There's a lot of debate over whether or not they're.
Okay. And we talked a little bit about this offline, about how we're going to get back to this categorization in a second. But so this year, if we look at this year's draft, let's just pick out the guys who are in the star category. Those would be Jahlil Okafor, D'Angelo Russell. Who we got? We have
Karl Towns.
Karl Towns. I can't remember who, but what's interesting to me about all these guys is that they're all one and done guys. So, you know, when you look back in the history of the NBA and you look at the guys who went number 1 overall, and until like the last 10 years, they were almost never freshmen, right? They were very, very rarely were they freshmen. They were usually guys with 3 or 4 years, guys that everybody labeled as a quote unquote sure thing, you know, guys like Tim Duncan and David Robinson and guys like that. So do you think it endangers, your ability to say this is the number 1 pick because the sample sizes are so small? Or do you think that isn't really that big of a deal?
I think, this is something actually, when we talked about email, I really wanted to look at this actually in the numbers and see if I could say anything about it, but I didn't get a chance to. My sense is that, yes, it matters, but it's not that big of a deal because, you know, 1 college season isn't that big of a sample size, but for stuff like rebounding, blocking, steals, assists, it's plenty. I mean, more or less.
Well, it's shooting that I worry about, right?
Yeah, shooting's the one thing that you have to worry about. If it's a guy who sort of makes his pay off, you know, from the 3-point line, then you start to. So like one of the guys who my model likes a lot is Stanley Johnson, and he is a rep as not necessarily being the greatest shooter, but he's actually shot well this year, and that's an issue where, you know, gosh, I'd like to have another season to see if he actually did it before I say, no, you guys are wrong. He actually can shoot.
Right.
So there are some cases where it matters, but I think, and the thing is, shooting, scoring in general is the hardest part to predict by far across leagues.
Yeah.
Of anything.
On that, can we clarify something too, just in general from a stats perspective? That's the hardest thing to predict in NBA as well. Like year to year, free throw shooting is where you start hitting, and this is going to sound mean, baseball territory. Because for as much as baseball people like to brag about having such perfect stats, the NBA blows away baseball in terms of consistency. And it's not until you get down to shooting numbers where it starts looking like Major League Baseball, where a great hitter you don't know year to year. And in basketball is something we always love is free throw shooting year to year. So even your point there, I'm actually really impressed by what you said earlier, where you say you look at like margins of victories and types of shots, because I think when you're looking at a player shooting, that's what you need to start anticipating. You need to say, well, he's got a lot of teammates that shoot threes. So if we bring him on our team and we don't have a bunch of 3-point shooters, we can't expect him to maintain that.
Yeah, and I think another thing to worry about too is whether shooting efficiency comes because they are a great shooter versus coming from their ability to efficiently score. Right. I mean, for example, let's take Kevin Love. You look at Kevin Love, he has a decent 3-point shots, but if you look at his career, he does not have a high field goal percentage, but he's a very efficient scorer because he gets to the line a lot and he shoots good free throws well there. And you could say the same thing about, the NBA. You can have a very efficient shooting season because you shoot 50% from beyond the arc, or you can have a very efficient shooting season because you get a lot of dunks. And what I would worry about is, a scout who says, well, player X is not a good shooter. And then you look at his numbers and his field goal percentage is like 55% because he's dunking all the time. And then you have to ask yourself, well, is he going to be able to get those baskets in the NBA? And is the coach kind of glossing over that to just concentrate on that player's weaknesses? Because I see it all the time that coaches are in love with a player's ability to hit the mid-range shot, even though that's probably the least important skill set in the NBA. What's important is, can you get to the basket? Can you either convert at the basket or get to the line? And if you can't do any of those things, can you shoot from beyond the 3-point arc? And if you can't do any of those things, then frankly, I don't give a crap how good your mid-range shot is, right? So is there, I mean, maybe this is something that's only covered by age and height and those kinds of indirect measurements. But is there any kind of way you can say, well, traditionally a guy who can get to the basket and score at the basket, at the rim, or get to the free throw line can also do that in the NBA? Or is that something where the correlations are just non-existent?
I can speak to this pretty well because I've looked at this stuff quite a bit. It's still noisy, but and we only have like play-by-play shot location data going back to 2012, 2011. So it's a small sample, but from that, looking at that data that we have, the guys who are going to do better are the guys who get their attempts at the rim. Unassisted at the rim is a very good sign. If you have a lot of unassisted at the rim attempts, that's a good thing. Assisted at the rim is good too, but unassisted at the rim is a much better indicator. The worst flag would be unassisted jumpers. And that's not surprising because an unassisted jumper, especially at the college level, is really an indication that you failed to get past your man and then you're just trying to shoot over him. And a lot of these guys at the college level, they're being guarded by somebody who's a few inches shorter than them, and they really can get a pretty decent look just doing a jumper over top of them. That is. By the way,
can I ask, do you have any good examples of people with the unassisted jumper over people, but they're good at it in NCAA?
Like guys who are able to do it in the NCAA and then it didn't translate?
Either didn't or possibly. I mean, if you've got both, if you've got a good example of a player that's gone into the NBA or even a player coming into the NBA in the upcoming draft.
I looked at this. I actually was looking at this like a year and a half ago, though, so I can't think of any really good examples. I think Harrison Barnes is a pretty good one. Who as I recall, had a high percentage of jumpers. Shabazz Muhammad is a guy who had a really scary high percentage of unassisted jumpers, and he's actually done a lot better in the NBA because he doesn't do that anymore. He's really removed that from his game, and he's actually been all right at the rim. So he's been able to improve in spite of that scary indicator. One of the other patterns that was a bit surprising to me, actually, but it looks pretty real, is that if a guy basically doing well in transition in the NCAA is almost completely meaningless in the NBA. So if you just ignore the transition possessions and you only look at half-court success, you're going to do better at predicting a guy's scoring ability in the NBA. And I haven't I mean,
What? Okay.
you still get transition situations in the NBA, so I would think it would matter. But as far as I can tell from the limited data we have, it doesn't seem to.
That's very interesting. I could speculate on a lot of reasons why they might be. The first and foremost, that being, in the NBA, they're just so much bigger and faster, and your ability to get out in front of a guy and stay in front of the guy and finish at the rim before he catches up is going to be a lot different in the NBA
Yeah.
than in the NCAA. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, okay. So we have our categories of, you know, I think it's safe to say nobody wants to draft a bust or a bench player. So let's forget about those, right? So you're an NBA team, you're in the draft room, you're on the clock, and there's 10 guys that are on your list, and you have basically available to you, you have the starter, the stud, and the star.
Mhm.
And how do you make your choice? Do you go for the guy who's, looks like he's going to be a starter, but it's probably a sure thing, versus the guy who could be a star, but he might also be a bust? Like,
Yeah.
so my big thing is I despise bad teams who draft for need. Right. It's why I'm actually a big fan of the way the 76ers have drafted, not because I think they should be tanking forever, but because when it's their turn to draft, they're like, we suck. I don't need to draft for need. I'm just going to take the best player available, and then later I'll figure it out, which is what really every team that sucks should do, because there isn't, like, you suck. Your position of need is every position because you suck. So stop trying to say, oh, we need a point guard. No, no, you need everybody. Your team's terrible. So just draft the best player available. But then I guess the question I'm asking you is the best player available the guy who's more likely to become a star, or the guy who's most likely to become a stud or a starter, or do the categories
Yeah.
have weights?
Well,
Is
so
there an algorithm that says draft this guy?
well, part of the impetus for setting it up that way, in addition to just doing the straight, expected value perspective, is that with the way the CBA is structured, it really pays to get your hands on the star, because that's really where if you get a good player, that's awesome throughout his rookie contract. But then once you have to pay him fair market wage, it's no longer
Then
that
you're
big
stuck
of a
with
boon.
paying, Drew
Yeah.
Holiday 12 million a year instead of getting
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just not, it's so, um, if you're a team that's already good and you have a chance at a guy who's, or maybe especially if he's an older prospect, you expect him to be hitting that level of peak performance sooner. Um, that's a context where I could see the attraction of a guy who's a really high likelihood of a starter, rather than rolling the dice on a guy with like a 3% chance to get a star or something like that. I think in most cases, just because of the structure of the contracts, where you have to keep rolling the dice. And
So you would literally just take the thing and sort by star percentage and draft the highest one.
Well, no, I mean I wouldn't exactly, but
Oh, wait. So are you backing up? Do you not believe in your model? What's going on here, Lee?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't believe in it to that extent. I think there's a ton of holes in it. There's only so much data that goes into it, and there's a lot of other stuff that you can try to add subjectively, or ideally you can, generate hypotheses that you can look more specifically at this particular player and get them. So, and I think there's definitely cases where I disagree with it.
So Patrick, it's almost like an analyst is saying context matters when you're using numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wait,
no, the beauty.
What, you're saying we have to watch the games?
Yeah, I know.
Wait.
Yeah.
I have to go to the arena? I have to watch the games? Damn.
No, the beauty of the numbers is that all your assumptions are laid there, and you know exactly what you've done, and it gives you a foundation to work from, which you don't get when you start from a more subjective perspective.
I've always thought that the numbers put things in context. Like I think in the organizations that do it well, and I'm thinking here of like the Spurs, maybe the Rockets, kind of hard for me to tell yet. It seems like they use the numbers to inform their scouts what to scout for, so that their scouts aren't wasting times, to quote the Moneyball example, figuring out if they have pretty girlfriends or not, and stuff like that, right? So, I mean, if the Spurs say, so there's a great thing from Pop a couple years ago where he talked about analytics, and he talked about how they crunched some numbers, and they decided that limiting their opponent's field goal percentage was going to be more important to them than rebounding. So they actually set up their defensive scheme to try and hold their opponent's field goal percentages lower, even though they knew they'd be giving up a few more offensive rebounds when that happens. So you decide that's important. So you start telling your coaches, I care about defensive rebounding, but not as much as I care about his ability to close out on a perimeter shooter, or his ability to, help on a guy who's cutting into the lane, or his ability to, bump the guy who's running to set a pick, and all the other things that the coach really cares about in terms of playing defense. But that all came from basically Pop and his team looking at the numbers and coming at a completely counterintuitive result, because he said that before I looked at those numbers, I was sure that defensive rebounding was like the most important thing about my defense. And then I looked at those numbers and I changed my mind. And clearly that's worked out well for the Spurs. And it's not like the numbers told Pop things that it's not like he looked at the numbers and said, wow, I don't know how to play basketball at all. The numbers are totally different. It's the numbers informed him in a way that allowed him to put his knowledge to use in a context. So if there's anything that if you were, campaigning for a job to pick the Timberwolves draft picks next year and you're in front of Flip, how are you going to tell Flip, like, what is his numbers going to tell him that's going to have him, with his relatively limited analytics background, that's going to change how he approaches evaluating draft talent?
Flip,
I'm just pulling Flip out as an example because anyone who reads my stuff knows I hate Flip and how he makes decisions. It's not that I don't hate Flip personally. I just hate the fact that all of the decisions are basically made by whether or not you're a member of the 20-year-old country club that Flip and all of his buddies are in, right? But so that's just an example. But pick a Doc Rivers or any other random.
Well, no, I mean, Flip's a great one because there's a pretty, I think, a pretty clear blind spot in the pattern that he's shown in the guys he's looking after, and that's these guys aren't these little formless balls of clay waiting to be shaped by you. I mean, these guys have been playing basketball for most of their lives. They're 19 years old. They've had very attentive coaching. If they can't do stuff on a basketball court, they're probably not going to be able to. And I have come from being very skeptical that things like athleticism matter to actually finding that, wow, this kind of stuff does help us understand. But just looking at the guy and
Can I ask a follow-up there, though? Because I find with athleticism, for instance, let's take Kevin Love. I did this a while back where I looked at Kevin Love compared to Blake Griffin compared to DeMarcus Aldridge. And people might tell you Kevin Love's not athletic, but you look at the combine numbers and you're like, this guy runs pretty quick. He's got giant freaking arms. He's 6'8" to begin with, so he's a giant already. He's got a big wingspan. He can jump pretty well. You just don't like that, candidly, you probably don't like that he's white, and you don't think he looks athletic, but if you actually give him athletic things to do. So when you say athleticism matters, what are you referring to specifically?
Well, I mean, so the stuff that you get in the combine, specifically vertical, which I was kind of disappointed to see that, because I had been kind of a strong advocate against, oh God, they're just talking about how high this guy jumps again and calling it athleticism and saying he's good. But it matters. It does help improve the models to look at.
Okay, wait. So does this mean you actually foresee a future of positive contribution from Zach LaVine, or no?
It means that I like Zach LaVine more than I would have if he could only jump 20 inches in the air.
But does that make him an NBA player or not?
No, and that's what I was. That's what I was
so you're
getting
clear,
to.
by the way, Patrick. I have been watching the scores. It's been easier since I'm not hosting or interacting as much to watch the NBA in the background. Zach LaVine did put up a 20 tonight, though that is after last night where he just. I don't know. I'll look it up, but he scored 20 in the show, man. Now he can start letting fungus grow on his flip flops or whatever.
Yeah, he scored 28 against the Lakers, I think, earlier this year too.
Yeah, no, I mean he gets a lot of minutes and he gets a lot of opportunities and he could be good. It's again, I like I said, my model sucks. I have to show humility,
right?
Because sometimes I'm wrong, but
Well, yeah, the way I look
but
at this though is that if Levine turns out to be great despite everything, then sure, but you might as well just thrown darts at a board, right? I mean,
well, yeah,
it's. I
yeah.
mean, I and I get that like Flip sees something in him that he thinks we don't see, but the point is we're all watching too, and it's like we see that athleticism and all that crazy stuff. It's just I think you made a great because what we don't see is that formless ball of clay that can turn into
Yes.
anything we want him to turn into. We
And
actually
that,
see a
yeah.
player that has flaws, and we think those flaws aren't going to be overcome by no matter how much you coach him. Um, and that's I think that's actually the danger of a guy like Flip, who's inherently a coach running the front office, because he thinks of everybody as a guy that, well, I can make this guy great because I'm a great coach. Even though that's
Yeah.
just not true. Even if you are a great coach, you can't make everybody better. You can't make everybody into the player you want them to be.
And this isn't really it's not even an eye test versus numbers kind of discussion, because there was nobody saying, oh my God, that Zach Levine is just
including his coach at
player.
UCLA, right?
Yeah. I mean, people try to point to nepotism, but I think it's tough to make an argument that he was any better than Bryce. I mean, he was probably the fourth best underclassman guard on his college team.
Yeah.
And that's whatever. I mean, but so that's not the level of debate. It's not eye test versus numbers. It's just, is there much hope for guys who aren't particularly good at basketball to become stars? And I think, yeah, sometimes it happens, but I think it's a terrible place to place your bets.
My favorite analogy here is the poker analogy. It's like, well, if you went all in with the gut shot and you got there, that doesn't mean you made a good bet.
Right.
It might have worked out for you, but I'm still going to say, given the knowledge we had, it wasn't a good bet.
So I've got a question. Patrick, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead, Brian, and then I'll come in right after you.
No, my quick one was when you were just talking there, Layne. Drummond was a big one that Ari and Arturo, our guys, both missed on, and I think a lot of people missed on. I think it was said that he was really young and didn't get enough minutes, so maybe it was just a small sample size. But what did you see in Drummond?
Well, actually, to interrupt there quick, when I asked Arturo about him, Arturo was like, I think Drummond was one of those guys that got missed because he was not the best player on a really good team. Because he was on a really good team and he wasn't the best player on that team. And if he had been on a different team, he probably would have been, playing 30 minutes a night and getting crazy numbers, which is an interesting hypothesis. But he was one of those guys where we were like, we ridiculed Detroit when he drafted that guy. And what's interesting though is we were really quick in his rookie season to turn around and say, wow, were we wrong about this guy? He's amazing. And yet it took Detroit forever to decide, oh yeah, wait, this guy's really good. We should give him lots of minutes.
So I'm going to say it's Layne, we're hitting your benchmark. So let's let you finish on that. And then I've got more to talk about that, Patrick, but we'll wait till after Layne's.
Yeah. Well, so Drummond's actually a guy who my numbers kind of liked. So if I look right now in the current form of the model, he was rated as the 5th best prospect in that draft by EWP.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he's sort of gone up and down more than other guys when I make tweaks of different types. But he's always, sometimes he's been as high as number 2 in some iterations. But anyway, he's always done pretty well. And honestly, I'm not sure why, because he had some real problems. I didn't like him at the time personally. But he's actually good. So I said before that, things like blocks and rebounds translate remarkably well. Mm-hmm. Drummond is one of the extreme examples otherwise. I mean, so I have another tool out there that I do.
If I remember, I don't have his numbers in front, but if I remember, he was not a good rebounder in college, right?
Nothing special.
Which is amazing because he's a fantastic rebounder in the NBA. So
he's one of the best.
It's
in the best
really
decade.
shocking. And, some of it might be because he's a really good offensive rebounder and he played for a team that didn't miss a lot of shots. He played for a really good offense. But it's just really kind of amazing how he's one of those crazy examples of to me, he just looked like a clumsy 7 foot guy who was never going to mount to anything. And then he just completely started dominating from the get go. And I thought that was funny because the narrative about Drummond from the day they drafted him was, okay, this is a raw guy. He's going to need a lot of work, and we were like, yeah, like too much work. He's going to be terrible. And then after about 3 weeks into the season, all of us were saying, this guy doesn't need any work. Put him out there for 48 minutes and let him collect boards, man. Yeah. But Detroit stuck with it. Nope, he's raw. He needs lots of work. We're not going to give this guy too many minutes. It's like, it was really frustrating to watch.
It's so I have another tool that does. You can look at the correlation of different statistics between NCAA and NBA, and then you can flip around to different coaches to try and get a sense, because some coaches suppress some things, some coaches
okay,
some things.
That's a lot of detail you've gone into with that.
It's cool, yeah. It's really useful.
I want to quick interrupt here before we get too far down this path. Yeah. Dre, you had a question you wanted to ask?
No, ironically, I'm just trying to let Layne get the last of his stuff because we're hitting the buffer. So basically, we're supposed to be walking into Layne, plugging whatever you want to plug, and then walking off because you gave us an upper bound, and we've actually crossed that by a couple minutes.
Okay.
Well, so I'm tracking up because I wanted to let you talk. So basically, Layne, where can people find you on the net? Why should NBA teams more NBA teams be talking to you, and anything else you want to plug to end your time with?
Well, yeah. I've got I write very occasionally at Nylon Calculus, but what I do more regular is I have a bunch of tools, a lot of them draft focused, that you can find if you go to that website, and there's a tab.
Yeah, this link will be in the show notes, and it's probably right on.
And LayneVashro.com basketball has your stuff as well.
Yeah, that's a good site, a good sort of home where I put the stuff that's worth looking at.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thanks a lot for having me.
The level of detail you go into on this stuff is really amazing. I mean, I've got a great appreciation for the amount of work you put into this stuff. And okay, quick pick before you go. You're on the clock. You've got the number one pick. Who's it going to be?
Karl Towns.
Karl Towns. And is that because best player available, or because like you think he has a higher ceiling? Like, okay, let me rephrase. Sorry, dumb questions. So, if you're the Sixers, Karl Towns.
If I'm anybody, it's Karl Towns.
Let's envision a weird scenario where the Lakers finish like out of the top 5, and they have to give their pick to somebody. I think it's the Suns that own that pick, right? So the Suns are on the clock at number 6.
The answer's
did the Suns take the best player available, or do they take a player they kind of need who's a good starter, because the Suns are a borderline playoff team?
At number 6, you take the best player available still, because the best player available is going to have a very real chance of being special. So I think I think the number 6, you're still taking the same player no matter what team you are, pretty much.
Okay, and one more quick before you go. Dark horse guy that's on nobody's radar, but you think he's going to be a star someday.
I don't have anybody right now for that. Nobody's radar. I mean, I love DeLon Wright, but he's getting quite a bit of respect. So he would be my favorite.
Okay, I feel like every year there's a guy like, 1 year it was Kenneth Faried. He was and then.
He's like the same range though, because he was picked in the 20s.
Yeah,
he was picked number 20 if I remember correctly, right? And because I remember being very pissed off that David Kahn traded the 17 pick when Faried was still on the board, like last year for us it was Kyle Anderson, who's kind of not really he's not on a team where he's going to get that opportunity, right? He's going to be lucky if he scratches 500 minutes, but he was kind of that dark horse guy that we thought might be.
So we didn't. The last thing before I go, in the 25 years that I have data for, this is clearly the class where my numbers are the most consistent with the standard NBA opinion.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that too. When I was looking at his chart, I was like, it doesn't look all that controversial, really.
This is the most boring numbers projections in history. It's really from throughout the first round. There are very few crazy picks that the numbers want you to do. It's pretty much the guys who the scouts think are good or the guys who the numbers think are good for the most part. It's a weird one. It's a complete outlier looking across the past 25 years.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. Once again, you are at Vashro underscore VGL underscore B-ball.
yes, yes.
Okay.
All right,
Thanks a
all
lot for
right.
joining us, and we'll hope to have you again sometime, maybe after the draft. We'll talk about
Absolutely,
who
yeah.
got drafted
Thanks.
there.
Yeah,
You can
have
kick
fun.
me off the show if you can trade for Layne. I'll actually agree with that right now,
Yeah,
Patrick.
you've been a great guest, really informative, great stuff.
Yeah, no,
Thanks for
it
coming on.
was real fun. Thanks a lot. Enjoy.
All right, cheers.
Yeah, I will. That was fantastic. So Patrick, you're the one who reached out on that. I can't, I actually feel bad being on the show with you this one because both of us had so many questions for him and he was ready with so many. That was
Yeah,
impressive. I was
yeah. I mean, it's clearly a passion thing for him, and he's ready with the answers. And then we didn't rehearse any of this stuff, by the way. We kind of threw out some topics and stuff, but it's not like he knew what questions I was going to ask him. Really,
Oh, it was
I
rough.
told him we were going to talk about one and done and stuff like that, but that's about it.
I threw him a curveball there, and then he came back with Harrison Barnes. To me, by the way, coming back with Harrison Barnes there, that's
That was a
like
pretty
knocking
good
it out
one.
of the park. I was like, all right, you could not have had a better answer
I would
ready
have
there.
gone with Eric Gordon, but that's just based on my perception of Gordon as an NBA player. I have no idea if that's what he was like in college because I don't watch college ball, obviously.
So by the way, as a kind of out to the internet talking, because we talked to lots of people about analytics. This is like, and I'm going to have to start using this, Patrick, in like tweets and stuff at people. This is how you respond to me in analytics to get me to listen, where it's like, the athleticism thing he just said there, right? That might be something I would have disagreed with at first principle. And he actually answered it himself, where he said, you ask the questions to the data, and if the data, varies and you can systematically show the difference, that's
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you change your mind.
I think that was really telling that at multiple points he said, well, this is something I thought going in was crazy, but then the numbers told me, whoa, I'm wrong. It actually matters in a certain way. Or, he actually let the numbers convince him that he was wrong about something, which is, I think is like going back to my little parable about Greg Popovich is like, one of the things I think one of the reasons Popovich is one of the greatest coaches is he doesn't approach every scenario thinking he has the answers, but he approaches every scenario with what are the questions I want to ask and like he's questioning all the time. He's not assuming that he knows everything. And I think that, he's changed the way the Spurs have played through the years, and that's because he's willing to let the data inform him about, being wrong. He's willing to say, well, I thought defensive rebounding was really important, but it turns out it's not. So let's give up a few more offensive rebounds if we can prevent some layups. Basically things like that. And I've got a lot of respect for people who approach the data in a way like that.
And I think it's funny because I know when you and I say this, what we get is people are like, well, you're staunch and you refuse to change your mind. And what I would stress is I don't think as many people realize the level of scrutiny you have to go to actually do realistic looks at data. So for whatever reason, so I'm going to laynevashro.com, which, yeah, that is it's a good thing to do. It's something I should do. If you do research in lots of places, putting just a homepage of you and then links to your sites is good. I'm clearly stalling while I click on basketball. My internet's going kind of slow. But no, he has all these tools that he's made where, like he said, he's looking by coach. He's got a coach network tool. He's got one of the things
he's asked a lot of questions that never occurred to me. Like, oh, well, what about this coach who plays this certain style? And so he's going to suppress statistics that don't match for that style, right? Like, if you play for a slow paced coach who likes to, like, if you play in Wisconsin under Tony Bennett, or I'm sorry, not an NCAA guy. I just, these things versus playing at a fast paced team that shoots lots of threes, like your numbers are going to be different, right?
So by the way, I have a small segue into one more thing. I know I've kind of taken the host role, but you put a fantastic article up today that John, I'm glad you got it up because I saw that last night. Like 3 or 4 people messaged me the John Oliver fantastic takedown of the NCAA.
Yeah.
And what I can say is I've seen John Oliver live. I got to see him second row. He stopped by Madison, Wisconsin. It was amazing.
Nice.
And the story he did, and this is hilarious, this is true, is there is a very large phallic statue of footballs in front of University of Wisconsin. And John Oliver gave like a 5 to 10 minute bit about that statue and how it's such an American thing to just make a giant penis statue in honor of college football. And his complaint was, he said he couldn't believe that we didn't have it lit up at night. He said there needed to be a spotlight on it so that 24 hours you had the giant penis statue in front of the University of Wisconsin. Yeah. But no, he was amazing. And I thought this was the nice other tie-in subject I think I put on the script to maybe talk about, because you put up that article, which is just, we're hitting March Madness. We're starting to talk the draft, just the absurdity of the NCAA. And just that was a fantastic, him taking it apart. And you and I have both written an article in the last week about our kind of thoughts on college football, college basketball, et cetera.
Yeah, I always think it's the story that's been getting me, the last month is apparently, and I didn't know this, the depths of this. I mean, I could have guessed, but how much of an asshole is Jim Boeheim? I mean, that guy seems like, if I've obviously don't know the man, I've not talked to the man, but if your actions define you as a person, he is a sleazeball of the highest magnitude, because, the things that, this is the guy who goes into a home and like shakes a mother's hand and says, I'm going to give your son the best education he can get. And then, to him, it's all just lip service. And then when it's time to actually take some accountability for your actions, he's like, I'm just the basketball coach. I'm not in charge of players' educations. How can you hold me responsible for that? And then, in his final game, he sends out his assistant coach to give all the bullshit, no comment answers about the scandal. He doesn't even go out to the podium to just sit there and fucking say no comment. He's not even man enough to do that. And that to me is just, I mean,
so by the way, another
literally speechless.
Another tease for another fantastic guest, Jonathan Weiler over at the ESPN Watch. Not looking like we're going to get him next week, but looks like
it's not going to be next week.
Next week we were hoping. We canceled in. He said he's got something, so we're going to have to wait to talk more NCAA. But that's still fantastic.
But it'll be right in the middle of the tournament, so it'll be.
He has a fantastic article about what you're just saying and a takedown of Jim Boeheim and all of this, like just general. Like he actually takes the NCAA side. I mean, it's you're fighting like Darth Vader or the Emperor. You're like, well, you're both evil, but one of you is less evil in this case. But I think what's absurd to me about college athletics and what I really enjoyed about that John Oliver piece is just, I'm actually starting getting speechless, but like one thing that I hate is this myth that comes up that everybody's like, well, they're all losing money. And you look and all of these schools make palaces to sports.
Yeah.
And it's not hard. It's like, well, you're losing money not because you're not bringing money in. It's because you're spending it stupid. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean you don't have a very lucrative business. It means you just have a stupid CFO. And all of these schools,
no, not stupid, smart, because it's easy to lose. It's really easy to lose money in an accounting sense. I would speculate it's completely impossible to lose money on college basketball in an economic sense. And if you're curious, those of you who haven't taken an economics and accounting course, go up and Google the difference between an economic profit and an accounting profit, because the two are very different things.
Can you give us a quick Reader's Digest? Because I don't know that, and I would actually like to hear real quick.
So, I mean, an accounting profit is I spend $50 on something and I get $60 in return. So let me rephrase. Well, let's say I spend 8 hours working and I get, I make something and then I sell that something for $50. So have I made an accounting profit? Yes, because my expenses were just my time, and my revenue is $50, and 50 minus 0 is $50. Of course, that's a crazy accounting because that assumes that my time is worthless. So now let's do things differently, and let's say I'm self-employed, but I found an LLC, and then I take a salary out of the LLC. So, and the salary I take myself pays myself $5 an hour. So I spend all day, 8 hours building something, and then my company sells it for $50. So my expenses were $5 an hour to me, which is 40, and the revenue is $50. So I just made a $10 profit, right? That's accounting. Economics, though, says, well, Patrick, if you had not built anything at all and you had just gone out and gotten a job at Walmart paying $8 an hour, at the end of the day, you have $64. Instead, you built something for $40 and then sold it for $50 and you have $10. So, economically speaking, you made a loss of $54 because that was your opportunity cost. You could have better spent your time doing something else. An economic profit is a profit that you get. It's above and beyond the opportunity costs of whatever it is you're doing. Does that make any sense? It's
Okay, and so to see if I've listened and learned, in regards to like football, there is nothing those schools could be doing that would bring in anywhere near the money for the way what they have to produce versus what they could sell it for. No way they'd ever be close. But all that happens is they bring in like $1,000 and then they spend $1,500 like paying a coach, building a stadium, and they go, well, we lost $500. It's like, well, economically, you had a fantastic thing there. Accounting wise, you're right. And the NBA is the same way,
yeah.
where
I mean, college football makes an enormous economic profit. They choose to spend because they can do accounting, right? They can treat the sports department as its own separate thing, and they can spend that money however they. So, rather than saying the athletic department is its own business, they can treat the university as a whole. As a business, and they can shuffle money around, like it's like you said, oh, we lost money, because we raised, $10 million playing college football, but we lost money because we paid the coach $3 million, and we spent $2 million on recruiting, and then we spent like $2 million on blah 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 blah, right? And then very quickly you're like, well, okay, so why didn't you just keep the $3 million instead of paying the coach? And they're like, well, if we didn't pay the coach, then we wouldn't have made the $10 million. And then very quickly you're in this circular argument of saying, well, so if you're saying that all the money goes back into the football program, that doesn't mean it's not making a profit. That's the equivalent of Amazon saying, well, we didn't make any profit. We're only $1 billion bigger than we were last year because we reinvested all the money in our firm. It's like, no, you made plenty of profit. You just didn't give it to any of the shareholders. You chose to just put it back into R&D and all these other things, right?
By the way, you pre-show you mentioned something like off-season, what to talk about, because after the draft, by the way, like if we want to have Layne on like 3 or 4 more times for the draft, if he's willing to do that, that'd be awesome. After the draft is where things dry up, and I would love to actually pick your brain about Amazon at some point.
Sure. I don't know that I'm the expert on Amazon. I worked there, but I wasn't.
Well, I mean,
I wasn't a decision maker there.
I don't think. I mean, I'd actually be candid and say like some of the stuff that I rant about on Twitter, like interview processes and minorities in tech. I do think my experience at Google, even though I would not even consider myself a success, I didn't get promoted. I was at Google for 2 years, didn't do much there. I didn't come out with any product I'm particularly happy that I worked on, but I do think I have insight as a result. So anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, I can give you the cliff notes are that I actually think from a recruiting and like diversity perspective, Amazon's a pretty great company. I might have a lot of complaints about, but that would not be one of them.
That okay. So so we've got some teasers for you.
But this is 10 years ago, right? I mean, I left Amazon in 2005, 5.
But to be fair, okay, so yeah, we've gotten us off track, but I'll leave that as a teaser. We'll talk this more in the future. I'll say I was at Google long enough to see what their old processes were, what their current were, and I was like, wow, you've made no improvements on that. So we got that as a teaser. Jonathan Weiler, hopefully in a few weeks, because he pushed off once already. He's a busy guy. He's actually works at UNC, so it's understandable. The real UNC. My wife went to the fake UNC. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to talk. The NCAA, I can just be mad forever. The other line I hate, I got this today and I actually had to call the person off, is they said, well, nobody's forcing these people to play at the schools, when I said they needed to be paid. And by the way, I guess I was in a good mood. I actually told the guy, I was like, that's your one for the day person. And by the way, that person represents the entire internet. That's your one stupid comment on the NCAA for the day. Yeah. Because that argument of nobody's forcing these, impoverished athletes who have no hope of getting an education otherwise to be at this school, and then dangling a stick in front of them and saying, this is your only hope to get into the NBA or NCAA in front of not NCAA, NFL, front of their face, saying they don't have to be there is the most ludicrous, ridiculous argument I've ever heard.
I've been meaning to ask my friend Darius Jones, who he's not famous on the internet really for any reason, but he played defensive end for the University of Washington in the 90s in the so-called Dogfather years. I don't know if that's even I didn't even know about this until I moved to the Northwest, but this is a big deal. Like during the 90s, UW was actually a really good football team. And he played for them. And one of the stories he used to always tell is, he said every single guy in the locker room, every single one was convinced that they were going to the NFL. Like it's you can talk all day long about how, it's ridiculously hard to get in the NFL. Only like 1% is going to make it, but he was like, nope, every single guy in that locker room thought they were going to the NFL. Every single one, because you play for a really good college team. You spent your whole life having everyone tell you how awesome you are. You're playing in crowds in front of 50,000 people. You're traveling to remote locations to play bowl games. They all thought they were going to be in the NFL. And you can't tell me with a straight face that there's a college coach in that locker room who doesn't, who's like, they are perpetuating that. The college coach is perfectly happy with that scenario, that all of his players have this irrational belief that they will be NFL players. He is perfectly happy having all of those players' hopes at this unrealistic level. There are no college coaches going in the locker room and saying, yeah, think about it, man. You're not going to play in the NFL. Don't worry about that stuff. Get a good education. No college coaches anywhere are doing that. Nor should they. It's not really their job.
By the way, I'm going to see if I can hit all four. I've got 4 responses that I'm going to see if I can hit all 4. First, Richard Sherman had a fantastic interview, which John Oliver mentioned, where he said, anybody who thinks they can get a college education while doing the workload required to be a full-time athlete is kidding themselves. And I know when I was in grad school for computer science, the joke my roommate had, I lived in a room where it was a joining room, so I had to walk through my roommate's room to get to mine. And he was like, I never see you, because I was always at the lab. And so I agree. Like if you had tacked on 30 hours, just even 30 hours, which is minimal, 30 hours of just working out, practicing, whatever, excluding travel, I couldn't have gotten my degree. So that already is ridiculous.
I mean, I could have gotten mine, but I was just a pathetic liberal arts major. So.
Oh, geez. Now you're making me feel terrible about the time as a computer scientist, because I have a lot of respect for your work as a computer scientist. Okay, the other one with the quitting thing, there are 2 great half takes on this. The first is Mike Birbiglia, and this is about being a stand-up comedian. And if you're going to be successful as a stand-up comedian, you have to be delusional, is what he says. Because he says if you were realistic with yourself, like he talks about his first show, he gets on the stage, he's supposed to do 10 minutes, he does 3 minutes, he bombs, he threw up before the show, he gets home and tells his girlfriend, it went great. And he's like, you have to tell yourself, because if you were, the people that are honest with themselves would quit. And there's a great Freakonomics podcast about that. And actually so let's leave NBA and NCAA on the table. If you look at baseball and hockey, the type of people that go on to become professional baseball players and hockey players actually look a lot like affluent white males who usually get degrees and go on to do very well. Because, we can talk class in another podcast. And they basically said, if you took a person that at age 18 probably can go to college, white male, whatever, and you say your options are try and be a professional baseball player or try to go to college. You've got the skill to do both, obviously. The worst option is to try and be a professional baseball player. My wife did not believe me when I told her most professional baseball players were paid worse than she was as a teacher, because she thinks major league. She doesn't think playing in Mexico for, hundreds of bucks a week.
Single A ball.
But yeah, so I mean, basically this notion of knowing when to quit, like most professional athletes should, but the super successful ones have to have it broken. So it's the worst 2-part scenario is when you combine those traits, the willingness to keep going when you should quit, but that also but mixed with you don't have the skills to make it at the top level. The last one, by the way, I actually got all 4. I'm impressed with myself. Malcolm Gladwell had a great article up about comparing dogfighting to football players, and basically the traits that you want to instill in dogs for dogfighting: supremely loyal, nice when they're not fighting, will do whatever they're told, will be super vicious one way but super nice another, are the same qualities that professional coaches. You look at that John Oliver thing, he's got the clips of coaches cursing out players. You want to break down these players to just be super obedient, super naive. And it's kind of a shame because we got this system, like you're saying, that is propping up these people that come in with false beliefs and, if anything, bolstering it. Wow, I can't believe I got through all four. Normally I drop at least two.
Good job, man. Good job.
All right, that's my rant. I mean, whatever you want to end on the show, because I'm going to consider that.
You know what? We got to wrap this up. We got to get to our lives, to get to our dinners and our wives and husbands and stuff. And so let's just do some shout outs. Who you got? I think you guys stole mine, by the way. I'm a little bit upset about this.
I'm going to let you, I'll let you do, I think, the first one, but I am really, by the way, Worlds, like, I'm sick of NCAA comments. World, God damn it. I am sick of using this slot for deaths that shouldn't happen. So Patrick, I'll let you do the shout out for that. I think that's the one you mentioned.
Wait, you
wrong shout out. Okay. Okay. So
I want to do the NCAA ones.
Okay. So Patrick, who, just hates awesome people and didn't have the shout out ready. We lost Terry Pratchett, one of the best fantasy writers ever, one of the most clever people.
Can I make a confession?
What's up?
I've never read a Terry Pratchett work.
That is more than fine. What I will say, actually, for busy people and people that like watching in the background, he's British. They have done a lot of really good movies with his that you can find for free on Netflix. The Discworld series, the first one, The Hogfather, those are both on there. Go to Netflix.
Are these like BBC shows?
They're like production movies. I don't know if they went straight to TV. But yeah, they're really good, and they're based on his books. And I've read a couple of his books. I've listened, there are some great people who do audiobooks of his work, and it's really creative stuff. So I'm sad to have lost him, another one. This is the third week in a row.
I think the reason I never was into it is I'm just not a big fan of like the fantasy humor genre.
Oh man, so you're not like a
the closest I ever got was like Douglas Adams, whom I liked a little bit. I liked especially the Dirk Gently stuff. But I just have never, or I guess Piers Anthony kind of falls into that category too. I used to read some of that, but
yeah, I like that. But
generally, I like the melodramatic stuff. George R.R. Martin and stuff like that. I'm just not into the lighthearted.
And as a shout out note, by the way, George R.R. Martin, who I'm sure is listening to the show and laughing at Terry Pratchett and saying, "See, I win even in death." George, if you don't finish your books before you die, you're not getting a shout out. So just leaving that for you. All right. So you wanted the second shout out. This one, I agree with. This was awesome.
You got to give the shout out to Ed O'Bannon and Jalen Rose. I love that they are both willing to be so, because oftentimes you see guys, especially Jalen Rose, who went on to make a lot of money playing basketball. Usually those guys, they tend to like sort of go with the establishment. And Jalen Rose in particular, Ed O'Bannon, I kind of understand because he never made any money off of it. And as John Oliver was so quick to point out, it was kind of a dick move of his nephew to point that out to him. But Jalen Rose eventually made lots of money playing basketball, but Jalen Rose did not like just take the establishment line. He's definitely gone out there and said, this whole practice is bullshit. And just me going to college so that some middle-aged white millionaire can shout at me was not a great thing. Like, he was like, fuck the establishment, man, give the players money. So big shout out to Ed O'Bannon and Jalen Rose. So.
Fantastic. And by the way,
Brian, you got one for us too, I see.
Oh, mine is just to Layne Vashro for coming on the show. He was a great guest. That's what I got.
Okay, this last one, this is winning. By the way, this is how to win and be a shout out. I apologize. You guys are great at commenting and talking on Twitter, and I'll be candid. We do the shout outs every week on the show, and sometimes I wait to do my homework, and so I scan my Twitter feed the day before or have stuff ready, like Leonard Nimoy or Terry Pratchett. But Michael, aka Self-Defeating on Twitter, is at the Miami game tonight, where Miami, by the way, just smoked LeBron. It wasn't even funny. So despite the fact that the Cavs were on a comeback, LeBron actually did do a last push in the fourth quarter, despite having a horrible game. But he had a sign for Hassan Whiteside with Hassan Whiteside's WP48 on a big sign on the sideline at the Miami game. If you open that link, Patrick, which I included in the script, there is a picture of him at the Miami Cavs game with Hassan Whiteside's WP48 numbers, which that's just winning. That is the coolest thing ever.
This is a winner.
Yes. And by the way, Hassan Whiteside, 16 points on 6 for 12 shooting, including 4 for 6 from the line. A measly because it's Whiteside, it's an off game for him. Only 11 rebounds and only 3 blocks. So, yeah, geez. So that's that. I think that wins the shout outs. I think that's a good place to end the show.
That's a good place to end the show. Yeah.
All
Thank
right,
you
and,
all for joining us. You can find us at the Nerd Numbers channel on YouTube. You can find us on Stitcher. You can find us on iTunes, and you can find us, of course, on boxscoregeeks.com. We'll be back again next week, and take care. Have a good week, everybody.
Perfect.